Hello! Are you tired of students struggling with traditional language learning methods? Discover the game-changing secrets of comprehension-based teaching that will make your classes more engaging and effective than ever. Stay tuned to revolutionize your approach and see instant results in your classroom. My name is Scott, and you're watching Immediate Immersion Live, where we're all about comprehension-based instruction in the modern language classroom. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back, everybody. How's everybody doing on this fine Tuesday? I hope everybody had a great 4th of July holiday if you're in the United States and celebrate. I know summer is half over. Can you believe it already? Many of us have to go back to school in just about a month, if not a little bit sooner. Can't believe it's already half over. Let me go through some housekeeping, and then we'll go ahead and get started. You know the drill. If you are watching live, please go ahead and type in hashtag live and let us know where you're watching from. If you are watching on the replay, put in hashtag replay and let us know where you're watching from. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments if you are watching live, or in the comments if you are watching on the replay, whichever you wish to do. Let us know what you're thinking. Engage with us. I answer all of the comments and chat, so please engage with us as we get through. If you find this information helpful, as always, please like and subscribe. It helps us get it out to more people. Share it with fellow teachers who you think will find it useful, so that we can get the information out and help people prepare for the upcoming school year. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, I want more thing to tell you. We've got two things going on. We are currently in the middle of our CI summer camp, so you're still available to get involved in that. Let me go ahead and put the link in here. So if you go to mm.us/summercamp, you can still register. Our next class is tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific, but all the classes previous to this have been recorded, so you're able to access them. So you want to get in on that if you want to get some refresh your skills in CI, or if you're learning about CI and what you want to do in class. That's what we're talking about in our CI summer camp. And on Thursday, we have our customized learning paths for diverse learners webinar at 3 p.m. Is it 3? No, it's 4 p.m. 4 p.m. on Thursday. It's only $7. So if it's something that you would like to be a participant of, let me go ahead and give you the link for that. Diverse learners, if I can type today. I'll put that also in the chat, show that on the screen. So again, $7. It's this Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, and it's mm.us/diverse learners. So I hope to see you at either or both of those activities. Okay, now let's get started for real. I'll get that stuff off the screen there. There we go. So the first thing we want to talk about here, because today we're talking about how we can go from traditional to CI and things that we can do to ditch that textbook. So one of the things, the first thing we want to talk about is engagement over the rote memorization. With a textbook, what happens? Kids are tricked into thinking that they have to memorize a whole lot of information. So think about it. An average textbook is 12 to 15 chapters, and in each of those chapters, there are 75 to 100 vocabulary items, 90% of which are not useful. They're not high-frequency vocabulary. They're words like pushpin and paperclip and swing set, which are just not useful words in the overall scheme of things. Plus, each chapter has usually about 3 grammar concepts, 2 to 3 grammar concepts and rules that kids have to memorize, maybe a list of irregular verbs or regular verb endings that they're going to have to learn on there. And then there's usually 1 or 2 cultural items as well. The whole thing, the way the textbook is presented, is that kids have to memorize all of this information. And we know how memorization works. After a while, they forget what they've learned because memorization only works as long as they continually to memorize it. It's like a hamster wheel. It goes as long as you're on that wheel running and running and running, but the moment you get off, the stuff starts to slowly slip away. That's why on final exams, kids are always cramming that information because they forgot it long ago, or the next year. Teachers are always reviewing 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks worth of material from the previous year because kids have forgotten it over the summer because it wasn't learned for mastery. So one way to combat this is to use storytelling or story asking to introduce vocabulary and grammar. When vocabulary and grammar is introduced in context, it helps the brain. When they memorize it, it sticks here on the surface. It just gets to the surface of the brain. For it to actually permeate and get into the brain and become instinct and natural, they need to hear the grammar and the vocabulary in context. They need to see it living and breathing and how it works within the context of the language. And a great way to do that is through storytelling or story asking. Storytelling is telling a story, whether it be, a historical story or from a storybook or from folklore or any of those types of things, myths, those types of things. Story asking is when you are co-collaborating stories with your students. Either work, but the point is that they're hearing them in context. And we know storytelling works because throughout history, that is how one generation taught the next generation, going back thousands and thousands of years. So storytelling is such an effective way to learn something. So instead of a list of vocabulary words, tell a story where each new word is contextualized and repeated multiple times. Imagine the difference. Juan walked into the cafe and ordered a coffee, and as he sipped his coffee, he noticed a cat under the table. That is so much more interesting than having kids memorize the word cafe, the word for coffee, the word for a cat, and the word for table. And I know textbooks love to give thematic vocabulary. And give me a 1 in the chat if you think that the vocabulary that a textbook gives on a chapter is way too much for our kids to learn and memorize in a 2 to 3 week time frame. Put a 1 in the chat if that's what you think is true. But thematic vocabulary, trying to learn all of the different words that go with a theme, isn't how we naturally learn language. I know it makes sense if you step back and think about it logically. It would make sense that, well, if we're learning about the word hamburger or ketchup or salsa, that we learn all the words that go with food at the same time. But think about how a baby learns its first language. That's not what happens. We don't go, okay, the baby is eating carrots, so let's go through all of the vegetables and teach him all of the vegetable words. It's not a natural way to do it. It seems logical when you look at it from a textual base, but in real life, it's just not logical. So put the vocabulary in some sort of a narrative, whether it be a written narrative or an oral narrative, so the kids can see how that vocabulary, how that grammar is used in context. Another strategy is to use images and props while telling the story. So when Juan orders coffee, show a picture or a real cup of coffee. We all know about using different modalities when we teach students and how important that is, because every time you attach something to a different modality, it's another hook in the brain for them to be able to actually understand what's going on and actually get locked in, permeate inside that brain. And so one way is to use visuals, images, and props to get everything going. We often act out stories, even if they're stories from a book, or they're stories from from mythology or a legend or folklore or something like that. We have kids often act out to give some kinesthetic and visuals to what's going on. So find ways to attach images to what's going on to help the kids. Also, props. Now, people sometimes go overboard with props and having way too many props. I always err on fewer props than more props. So one of the popular props that my kids really like are funny hats. So we found this years ago at a national NTPRS conference in San Antonio. There was a funny hat store that was close by, and a lot of us picked up hats from that time. And that really helped engage students. Since then, that store is closed and it's hard to find hats in local places. But if you go to Amazon and search for funny hats, you can find all kinds. Pizza hat, hamburger hats, cat hats, cow hats, all kinds. And I have a string that I hang in the front of my room. And then I use those binder clips to attach them all to the string, so they're always there for me to use. So I'll pick one or two of those hats that'll really fit with our story that works really, really well. Another thing is to have just one or two other key physical props that will help with the story. If there's a cat in your story, like I have a lot of stuffed animals, I keep it in a zoo. My zoo is just a bookshelf that has the animals in there. When we can use an animal, we'll pull one out. So that works really, really well. Or maybe you have a fire truck, or you have some other prop that will work. But 2 to 3 props max. Otherwise, it starts to get a little bit unruly. And I'll have a little, one of those big, plastic tubs you can get at Target. I'll have that as my toy chest, as my prop chest, so kids can find things in there. And then I have one key secret prop that I have in my pocket every day of the school year, because I never know when it's going to actually fit in. And that is a gaudy opal ring in a ring box that I got donated to me from a student years ago. And it works so well because whenever 2 characters have the potential to get married in a story, then I tell one character to get down on one knee, and I secretly give them this ring box, and they present it to them, and they propose, and it's such a fun aspect. So have a secret prop. It doesn't have to be like a little ring. It could be whatever you want, but have a secret prop that you can put into almost any story to get a little bit more engagement. And the third strategy is to encourage students to create their own stories using new vocabulary, fostering creativity and deeper engagement. So I do this on a weekly basis in our weekly quick writes. I'll put vocabulary or some kind of situation in there where I want kids to create their own stories completely on their own. And that allows them to use all of their language that they have to come up with something new. And whenever kids can apply what they've learned in a new and different context, that's demonstrating true proficiency with what they've learned. Just knowing it in the same context that it was taught, in the story that we read together or the story that we created together, that's not proficiency. That's performance, where they can just regurgitate the information that they learned through there. But when they can take the information, the vocabulary and the grammar out of those stories, of those original contexts, and put them in their own context, that's proficiency, and that's our goal. And one of the ways to get this done is through having our kids do quick writes using some of the new vocabulary or grammar aspects. So let me know, which of those 3 strategies did you like the most when it comes to engagement over memorization? Is it putting them into a story? Is it using images and props? That's number 2. And type in number 3 if you really like to get your kids to create your own stories. Let me know what you like best in the chat or comments. Next up, active participation over passive learning. When you give kids exercises from the textbook or in a workbook, that is passive learning. They're not actively learning. It's also lots of times, what's the word I want to use? It's learning by default, what's left over. Like, for example, if they're giving you exercises on conjugations of verbs, depending on the language, there might be 5 or 6 questions. And then by the time they get to the last one, it's whatever form is left over. They don't really understand the question or the sentences in there, but they get to, they're just going, I need to fill in the blanks. Rachel says, I use a lot of props. I use the novels more because I'm not super good at storytelling yet, but novels work well. Yes, novels are a great way to get kids involved. And I usually read 2 novels per year. With my kids, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get through a novel, but that's a great way to do that. And just to give you a suggestion, Rachel, if you're not really good at storytelling, script out a story. Back when I started, I would script it out like Oprah. So I would I would print it out on pieces of paper, and I would cut the paper in half. So it was a half sheet of paper, and then I would write it in 14 or 16 fonts, so it was really big, each section of the story. So the beginning page would be the character, and then the second page would be the problem, and then the third page would be the character trying to solve the problem but fail. And then the fourth one would be the character trying to solve the problem and succeed. And I would have it all scripted out on each little piece of paper, and I would allow my kids to change some of the things in there. In the beginning, I was not comfortable with letting them come up with their complete new ideas because I couldn't think on my feet very well, very fast. So if it was a boy in my story, it stayed a boy. That did not change. But I let the kids come up with the name and the description and the characteristics of that boy, where that boy lived. So that would work. And then I had the problem already established because there was a problem and I was going to stick with it. But I would let them describe the problem or tell them why it was a big deal. So that might help you with that storytelling aspect until you get more comfortable doing it. And then what really helped then, as I did that more and more years, I could get away with saying, okay, I don't care if it's a boy, it could be a girl or a dog or a rock. It didn't really matter, and I could work that. Until now, I don't even walk in with a script at all. I just know we have to come up with a character. They have to have a problem. They need to try and solve the problem but fail, and they need to try to solve the problem and succeed. I can just walk in with that, and it really, really works. I also used to stress about the details of the story because each class would come up with different details, and I would write them down on a sticky note at the end of class so that I could remember them for the next day. And then one day, all my sticky notes disappeared. I came in the morning, and they were all gone. They must have fallen on the floor, and the custodian cleaned them up, and I was like panicked until I realized it didn't matter if I remembered the different details of the story. That's what the kids are for. They only had to remember one story, where I may have had 4 or 5 or 6 stories depending on how many classes I taught that day. So I didn't care. So what ended up happening was I said, oh, class, we had a story. It was about a pig. And they're like, it wasn't a pig, it was a donkey. And it was a kind of an assessment to see if they really were paying attention. So I don't stress the details anymore. If I forget them, it's great because the kids will remind me and it just tells me they were paying attention. So novels are great, Rachel, but you want to try to get into some storytelling and get the kids more engaged with that, and you can try those strategies to help you out. So going back to our active participation versus passive learning. So as I said, when they're working on those activities, they're not really actively learning. They're just kind of like filling in the blanks rotely. And they don't even often know what's actually being said. They've been trained to look for clues. Like they know the subject pronouns. And so they look for the subject pronoun and then match that with the ending of the verb. And this is why when it's not a clear subject pronoun or a clear subject, they get it wrong. Kind of like when they do Maria and I. So the kids will see the word I and then write in the I form of the verb when actually it's a we. Or they'll see Maria and Juan, and they'll see Maria or they'll see Juan, and they'll think it's the he or she version of the verb when it's actually a they version of the verb. That's because they're not really understanding the sentences as a whole. So the strategy here is to incorporate interactive activities that require student active involvement. So first, use TPR, total physical response activities, where students physically respond to commands. Instead of just saying stand up, you demonstrate and have students follow along. And you start with TPR. There's 3 phases that you generally go through. The first is to associate the word with the action. So you start that way going, and then you say the action. You say the word, and you do the action, and then the kids repeat the action after seeing it. And you work through that until kids can do this without much hesitation. Then you go to the next phase, and this time you say the word, but you delay your action. Kids should be doing the action the moment you say the word, but you delay the action so kids can confirm whether or not they got the action correct. Again, you're looking for hesitation. When the kids are being able to do this without the hesitation, you can move on to stage 3. And stage 3 is when you state the word, but then you do not demonstrate the action at all. And then you're looking for how fast the kids can actually do the demonstration of the action. Once they've gone through those 3 phases and kids are confidently and quickly, without hesitation, associating the words with the actions, then you can start doing commands and mix up what we call novel commands. Run to the door and touch it with your left hand while touching your nose with your right hand. Or stand up slowly. Or sit down fast. Ways of doing those things. I remember one of the teachers I worked with, he was great at this, much better than I ever could be. He was like teaching the words like brushes. So he'd have you brush your hair, starting off there. Then he would have you brush your leg hair, brush your arm hair, brush your nose hair, brush your ear hair, all over the place. And he would even joke, he goes, and ladies, I want you to brush your mustaches just like the boys have them. So it was just kind of funny that he kind of did this all the time, and the kids had a lot of fun with those novel and unusual commands. So it gets kids physically moving and engaging with that vocabulary. Another idea is to create language games that require movement and interaction, such as scavenger hunts where students find objects based on descriptions in the target language. I love doing scavenger hunts with my kids, and I love doing them, pairing them with novels, Rachel. It's a great way. So I'll put different clues around. The way that my classroom worked, I had some of them in my classroom, some of my clues hidden in my classroom, and some of the clues, hidden. We have an outdoor section called the quad, and I would hide some of them out there. So the first thing, I would have kids in groups go out and look for all the clues. And then they had to write down all of the clues that they had and then come back as a group and put those clues in order based on the text or the novel that we were reading or the story that we did. That was one great idea. The other was I give kids pictures of different items that I wanted them to look for. And so then they had to go and find the vocabulary words, write the vocabulary word next to the image, and then also tell me where they found that vocabulary word. That way they weren't just trying to, I know what the word for apple is, so I'll go ahead and write it down. They need to tell me where it was. You can do all kinds of things, and you can put the clues in English for lower levels or in the target language for upper levels. But it gets the kids up and moving and engaging with vocabulary and the language in a fun way. My kids always love doing these scavenger hunts. And a third idea is implement role-playing scenarios into where students are acting out dialogues, practicing real-life conversations in a fun and dynamic way. And the key about this is not to give them time to memorize these things. You want them to work with the vocabulary and grammar and language that they already have in their heads and spontaneously do this. This puts it in a more real world situation, because in real life, they're not going to have memorized dialogues that they're going to practice before they go and interact with someone at a market or at a hotel or on the subway or the metro. They're going to have to react using the language that they have in that moment. So when we used to, in my day, we used to have to memorize dialogues and skits. That doesn't really help because nobody else knows those dialogues and skits that we learn, and people don't really talk that way. So let the kids, give them their scenarios, but then just give them a couple minutes to get ready into the scene, and then act it out right then and there using the language they already have. That puts them in the real world situation and allows them to go from that passive learning into more active participation. Does anybody have any questions or comments, or which of those activities did you like the most? Let me know in the comments or in the chat. Next up are real life contexts over abstract concepts. So the strategy here is to teach language through real life situations and cultural context. One of the things I love to do is have conversations with my students. So as the years go on, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, in the later levels especially, I do more conversations than I actually do stories, because lots of the higher grammar is hard to get into a story, but it comes up naturally through conversation. And that automatically, if you're talking about small talk or having real conversations with kids about things that they like or things that are interesting to them, those are real life situations, and high frequency vocabulary shows up no matter what. There's no way to get around it, because what you use in everyday conversations is high frequency by its own definition. So you want to apply that as much as possible. So instead of teaching that grammar in isolation, integrate it into a cultural lesson, like discussing traditional French meals and having students practice ordering food in a simulated restaurant setting. So this is that role play. It's a real life context. But again, don't let them memorize rote phrases and statements, because in real life, it's never going to come up that way. They never answer the same way that you memorized in a dialogue. So always make these as authentic as possible. And how you do that is by not giving them time to prepare. Tell them to use the language that they already have to communicate, to make meaning of what they need to express. That's how they're going to learn, and that's how they're going to be most prepared for the things that happen in real life. Because I remember I hated memorizing stuff, but in one of my German classes, we had to memorize these dialogues, these long dialogues, hotel interactions, doctor interactions, all those kinds of things. And I remember knowing the hotel dialogue, and the first time I went to Germany, I started with that dialogue when I had to go talk to the person behind the counter, and then I'm like, wait, that's not the line you're supposed to come up with afterwards. And I was all, flabbergasted, because I didn't know how to respond, because it wasn't exactly as that dialogue. So I wasn't taught to actually use the language that I know to make meaning and get my ideas expressed. And I remember another time when I was in Spain. When I was in Spain at 17, I went to Spain all by myself, and my parents sent me for my high school graduation. And I went there to, I was part of a tour group, but I needed to get whiteout. And I had no idea on how to say whiteout. And, I only had high school Spanish. I had 3 years of high school Spanish. I thought I knew everything, and I did not. But what I really learned from that experience is there was a little stationery store next, near my hotel. I walked in there, and this was in a smaller town. So it wasn't like a big city like Madrid where they might have known English. They did not know English. And I had to make, with the language that I knew, make myself understood so I could buy a bottle of whiteout. And, they didn't have the brand called Whiteout, so they didn't know what that was. And I had to use the words that I knew. I was like, something to fix errors, that covers the errors. And I finally got what I needed to get. But I was using the words the vocabulary and the language that I had to make meaning happen. Nothing I did in the classroom prepared me for that situation. We kind of want to think the same way with our students doing that as well. Another thing is to use authentic materials such as videos, songs, news articles. Show a short news clip in the target language and have students discuss it. And what's great is nowadays we have access to this stuff so easily, like through YouTube. So, and what's great about YouTube is you can slow down the speech so that kids can understand if it's coming up too quickly. You can add subtitles to the bottom so they can read along with hearing it and put the words back together again. So it's really easy to find authentic materials. Songs are another one. We do a song every 2 weeks in class, and that allows kids to get into the culture of music, and we can talk about it. News articles. You can go online and find and access newspaper articles or online articles that kids can read, and you can talk about current events or current cultural things that are going on. And that really helps kids get into the culture and the language in a real and authentic way. Back when I was learning in school, I remember I would have to go to international newsstands, and then you paid a premium for getting, El Mundo or, different newspapers in different languages, I remember. And that was static, meaning the next week that newspaper was out of date already and the information wasn't very good. And then lots of times we would subscribe to those magazine subscriptions for language classes. But again, those weren't real life type articles about real things happening in the world. And they were really expensive to spend for the classroom. But nowadays we have so much access to these authentic materials, so make use of them. Another great use is Netflix. Whether the material that you're looking at Netflix, the movie, the TV show, comes from the actual culture you're studying, lots of times they have them in multiple languages. So I might find, let's say, Friends. Our kids are really obsessed with the TV show Friends, 30 years after it was popular. But they like that. But you can dub it. You can switch the language into Spanish or French or German. Lots of times they give you multiple language opportunities for that. So that's a great use of that. Or for your older students, it doesn't work really well for middle school where I teach because I can't find an appropriate TV show from Spain or Mexico that is age appropriate for my kids. But for high school, there are series that you can get from Spain or Mexico or some other country, France, whatever, and you can go ahead and do that and show that a weekly episode there. Again, you can slow it down, you can put subtitles in there and make the kids really engaged with actual TV shows that are authentic to the culture. Rachel says, I started teaching in 1999 and remember exactly what you're talking about. It was such a challenge to find material. Now the challenge is to read through and find the perfect material. Yes, absolutely. But it is great that we have that in there, and that is our biggest problem, is to find the perfect material. If that's our biggest problem, we don't have a real problem. There is so much more content out there that makes it so much easier. And I remember when I traveled to other countries, I would bring back books because books in the target language were not always easy to find unless you were teaching Spanish. But for German and French, it was much harder. But I would bring back cereal boxes from there or soda cans from there. Or my kids, in Spanish, do not disturb is no moleste, and the kids always think moleste means molest, which is not the main meaning of that. So I'd bring back a do not disturb sign from a hotel to show kids how it actually was used. So that realia is good too. But nowadays we can find a lot of that online, and it makes our jobs so much easier. You're so right, Rachel. And lastly, organize those virtual exchanges with native speakers, allowing students to practice language in a natural conversational context. Again, this was not possible when I was growing up in the 80s in school, and even when I started teaching, it wasn't possible. But now with things like FaceTime and Zoom, we have lots of ways to be able to do this. You can do this synchronously, where it's live, or asynchronously, where it's like a video message. Then you could leave a video message back and forth. You can coordinate with another class. Maybe you can do a sister school from another country. That works really, really well. Or what I found really, really works well also is to find local native speakers who will communicate with your class. You can either have them come in person and do it. They can do it virtually, either live or asynchronously, because it may be live for one class, but it's not live for every class because they can't sit around for 7 hours all day. So you might have it live for one class and asynchronous for another. But where I get my resources, I go to find native speaker parents. I also go out to the community and I look for native speakers out in the community. Maybe they own a local Mexican market or Mexican restaurant or a French, restaurant. Right around my house, we have a local Mexican market right around the corner. There's an authentic Mexican restaurant right around the corner. And we have 2 Peruvian restaurants within a mile of me as well. So I've got a lot of resources to get people to talk about things and engage with my students in real life conversations with real native speakers. And it's a really fun way. Another example, and going back to Rachel's idea with novels, one of the novels that we read was, I've got to translate it here. Let's see. Life and Death in the Mara Salvatrucha gang, which is the MS-13 gang. It's loosely based off real events, but one of the things we talk about in there is because of the civil war in El Salvador during the 80s, that was the impetus for this gang to be created in Los Angeles. And one of my students was Salvadorian, but he did not speak Spanish, so he was learning Spanish along. But his father was one of those refugees who escaped El Salvador in the 80s as a child. And so we invited the father to come into class and actually talk with our kids as we were reading the novel, and it made the novel much more real and authentic for my students because they were talking with someone who actually experienced a lot of what they talked about in the novel. Now, the father was not involved in any way with the gangs, but he did immigrate because of the war. He remembers the civil war in El Salvador. He remembers the problems that were going and how they escaped and became refugees in America. So it was really an authentic way, and it was a really great way to engage our students in that culture, in that context, and make it so it's actually concrete in real life over just the abstract. I mean, just talking about a civil war is not the same as hearing someone talk about it who actually experienced it. Next, let's talk about continuous comprehensible input over isolated drills. So our goal is to speak at least 90% in the target language every day and provide consistent exposure to the comprehensible input. Because when you're coming from a textbook, lots of times teachers will practice the drills that are in the textbook. But what it comes out to be is the class is conducted in English with a little bit of the target language. And one of my students told me when she moved from my class, she moved to a different state. So she got a different class and she said, "Profe, your class was in Spanish with a little bit of English, but the class I'm in now is in English with a little bit of Spanish, and it makes a big difference." So we want to provide as much comprehensible input as possible consistently in the classroom. Shoot for as much as you can get in there. I know when I'm better at this, then some years I'm better at this than others. My kids in the classes where I am using the target language more excel much quicker. They become their fluidity in the language, not their fluency in the language. They're not fluid, but their fluency in the language comes much faster, and they're much more confident in the language when the target language is the language of communication in the classroom. So begin each class with short, simple story in the target language. Gradually increase complexity as students' comprehension improves. So start small and build up. That always helps. Always try to find simple ways to express whatever you need to express in the target language. Not only are you exposing the kids to comprehensible input, but number two, you're also showing them by example how to circumlocute, how to simplify what you're saying to make sure it's understandable. One of the ways that I like to make myself understandable, I prefer to translate. When I translate to make things clear for kids, I do it on the board and not with my voice. I don't want to break that illusion of immersion. Plus, if I say it, it goes in one ear and out the other. And if I refer to that word again, I have to repeat myself again with the translation. But if I have it written on the board, I can just go back and point to it when I use it again. And for ease of the board space, I do a Google Doc. So I'll make a Google Doc, one per class, and I'll have 2-column table, and in one column will be one color, the other column will be a different color. In the first column, I put the target language word, and in the second column, I put the translation. I don't put it by sentence, I put it usually by word or short phrase, if the phrase really needs to go together. But I don't put full sentences up there. That way I can easily point to the words that I need to point to, and it really helps the comprehension level. Another idea is to use visual aids. We talked about that before, how important visuals can be. Things like illustrated books, infographics, and videos to support understanding. Think about the impact of a short illustrated story versus a plain text. One of the great ways to do this, we used to do silent reading with children's books, but then I realized that children's books are at a much higher level than what my students can really understand. And they always would go for the books that they remembered in English that were translated. And they really didn't get much out of it. So now I have them read novels in silent reading, and I save those children books for what Susie Gross coined as kindergarten day, where I read to them, pointing at the pictures and talking about the pictures and describing the pictures and the text, and giving them an illustrated book to go off of. And it's a really fun activity for my kids to really get involved in the language with images, with text, and have a fun day doing it. So that's a great way. Finding infographics that talk about cultural elements or statistical information that you can talk about, that helps as well. Or videos to support a cultural thing or an idea. Let's say, for example, in the book, like we were talking about the life and death in the Mara Salvatrucha gang, they talk about jumping in. And I found a movie clip of a kid getting jumped into the gang so the kids can really see it and feel it and explain it much better than the book could actually do. Or when we read another book and they talked about the Nazca lines in Peru, that we went through and I found videos of people exploring the Nazca lines so they could see them in real life. So all of these ways are great ways to use visual aids and infographics and videos to make you more comprehensible. And then finally, implement daily listening activities using podcasts or audio recordings where the language is slightly above the student's current level, but still understandable. If you always stay at the student's level, there's no room for them to grow. So you always want to be slightly above their level. It's kind of like, a track star is always pushing their time to get the best personal best in there, or a swimmer is trying to shave off fractions of seconds just to get their personal best. It's the same thing with language. We want to push our kids, but we don't want the jump to be this big. We want the jump to be this big so they actually have a chance at success at that. But using the target language daily, implementing stories that kids can listen to and answer questions about, or listening to podcasts or audio recordings where the language is still comprehensible for students and you can engage them in questions about it, are great ways to expose kids to not only other voices, other dialects, other accents, but also getting them used to hearing native speakers speak and being able to understand what's going on. Awesome way to do that. And our last topic for today is personalization over one size fits all. That is one of the key things that we really want to focus on in a comprehension-based classroom. In order to reach all the students, we want to find a way to take what we have to teach and make it more interesting to our kids. And one way to do that is to personalize it, to tailor our instruction to meet the individual student needs and interests of the class. And so one of the ways you can do this is conduct interest surveys to find out what topics excite your students and incorporate those into your lessons. So if a student loves soccer, include soccer-related vocabulary and context. I get this information through conversations. So that's the way that I find it. It sticks in my brain more because it's in context and I can remember the situation rather than having written surveys or even Google Form surveys. Those don't stick in my brain as well. And then when I do a story and I remember, oh yes, John loves to play soccer, and I can find a way to implement that into the story, then John gets much more engaged. So I can do this and ask kids, what's your favorite music? Who's your favorite singer? Who's your favorite group? What type of music do you listen to? What types of books do you read? Oh, you don't read books? What do you like to do? Oh, you're a gamer, or you're a skateboarder, or you like football, or you like soccer, or you like basketball. All of that information becomes useful because it doesn't matter what we talk about in a language class. That's the beauty of what we do. We can talk about anything, but as long as it's in the target language, we're doing our jobs. So why not gear what we talk about into things that students are really interested in so they'll pay attention to that? That's what's important there. Another idea, provide choice in assignments, allowing students to select projects that align with their interests. This could be as simple as choosing the theme for a presentation or a story, but giving them choice boards. If you have to give homework, give them choices to work on that. Or projects. So one of the things I like to do are what we call Genius Hour. So like once a week for like 6 weeks, the kids have picked a project to work on, their own idea, and then they get to work on it every hour, like for 6 Fridays in a row, and then they completed the project. Obviously, they can work on their own time as well, but I give them class time to work on that. But they designed the project. They thought about the project. But the goal is they have to use, the project has to demonstrate their ability in language, and then they can find out how they do this. This works so great for kids who need more diversity or who are diverse learners. They might have an IEP or some learning disability, and they can find ways to really demonstrate in alternative ways how they can master the material. This is one of those things that we talk about in that workshop that we're doing on Thursday, on customizing the learning paths for diverse learners. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, you'll want to join us at mm.us/diverse learners. And as I said, it's only $7 to participate. And lastly, our other example would be to offer differentiated instruction and materials. For advanced students, provide more complex readings, and for beginners, offer simplified text with lots of visuals. This is a great way to use Michelle Whaley's and Lori Clark's idea of embedded readings. So you have more complex reading versions for your advanced students and more simplified texts for your beginning students. And all the information is the same, it's just simplified. It's graduated up to the more complicated, from the simple to the more complicated. You can even work backwards. You can take real literature. We do this with one of the myths we get from, I want to say it's a Guatemalan myth that we do in level 2, and it's a 2 or 3 page native speaker written for native speaker story. And then I have it in 3 different versions, from simple to medium to the full version, to be able to scaffold it for my different readers to be able to understand the entire myth. And then we can go ahead and discuss it. So find ways to, to extend the activity for your advanced students so they're not bored, that they're challenged at their level, but also scaffold it for your struggling students so they can participate and be active in the information as well. So by focusing on all of these concrete strategies, you'll create a more engaging and effective language learning environment that stands in stark contrast to traditional methods. So let's try to bring those classrooms to life and get out of the textbook and see the difference in student outcomes. Does anybody have any questions or comments or an activity that you're excited to try? Brendan says 1 and 2. Awesome. I missed that earlier. Sorry about that, Brendan. So he was referring way back in the beginning. We were talking about the engagement over rote memorization. And so 1 was the using storytelling, and 2 was using images and props. So thank you for that, Brendan. And I got to go back so I can find, there it is, so I can get rid of that comment. Remember to like and subscribe if you got any great information out today, and share it with other teachers so that other people can also learn from what we're doing. So it's really important to like and subscribe. Next week, what are we going to be talking about? Next week, let me see. What's on our list is... We'll be doing the same time, Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific. And where are we? We are on episode number 90, going on episode 91. Can't believe I've done 91 of these lives. But we're going to be talking about 5 easy steps to transition to comprehensible input. That's what we're going to be talking about next week, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, next Tuesday. And until that time, everybody, I hope you have a great week and enjoy the last bit of our summer.